She was hired to clean a house, but a romance bloomed in the most unexpected place. He, a reclusive millionaire, craving pleasure and haunted by darkness in his heart. But the mansion hid secrets that could destroy them. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Claire was 22 years old with an old soul. Since childhood, she had learned to silence her desires to survive in the narrow streets of Copper Hill, where she grew up among the shadows of colonial churches and the weight of unspoken secrets. Raised by a bitter grandmother who spoke little and prayed much, she had grown up among hidden letters, torn photographs, and a name that was never to be pronounced. Her mother, Rachel, who died in unexplained circumstances when Claire was only 2 years old. The only clue she possessed was a silver keychain with the initials RM and a phrase engraved on the back: "Truth rests where time has stopped." It was a legacy of pain and a silent invitation to the unknown. For years, Claire had imagined 1,000 stories about those words, but never had the courage to investigate. Until necessity knocked on her door like a court officer. At 22, orphaned for 3 months and with debts growing like weeds, Claire needed work. Any work. That's when she learned about the housekeeper position at Westridge Farm, an isolated property in the Blue Ridge Mountains, known in the region for its oppressive silence and for secrets that refused to die. The current owner, Victor Westridge, was a figure shrouded in mystery. 39 years old, heir to one of the oldest fortunes in the state of Virginia, built on coffee, mining, and family tragedies. Absent from Virginian social life for almost a decade, he was marked by a scandal that had emotionally exiled him from the world. His fiancée, Isabella, had disappeared on the night of their engagement party in 2015, and he was never the same again. The bus journey to the farm lasted 6 hours, winding through dirt roads that seemed to take Claire far away from everything she knew. When she finally spotted the main house on top of the hill, she felt a shiver she couldn't explain. The colonial construction, with its white walls and blue windows, should have been welcoming. But there was something disturbing about the way shadows danced between the porches, as if the architecture itself kept secrets. Mrs. Connie, the caretaker who had lived there for decades, received her with a forced smile and whispered warnings. "Girl, this place has its rules. Don't go into certain rooms, don't ask questions about the past, and above all, don't look the boss in the eyes for too long. He's not like other men." Claire nodded, but inside she felt a burning curiosity. There was something broken in that place that matched what was also broken inside her, and it was in this silent fissure that she began to feel that she hadn't arrived there by chance. Victor appeared on the first night, descending the dark wooden staircase like an apparition. Claire was organizing books in the library when she saw him for the first time. She didn't feel fear, she felt vertigo. He appeared in the doorway, his face half hidden by shadows, like a man sculpted by grief itself. Tall, broad shoulders, slightly disheveled black hair, and eyes the color of roasted coffee. But it wasn't sadness that emanated from him. It was contained fury, raw desire, an appetite for something that even he couldn't name. Victor didn't believe in love. He said it was a fragile invention for weak hearts. His relationships were brief, intense, and disposable. He lived at war. With the past and the present was just the battlefield where he tried to suffocate the pain. "You must be the new housekeeper," he said, with a husky voice that made Claire feel a strange warmth in her stomach. "Mrs. Connie told me about you." "Yes, sir, Claire." "Victor. And don't call me sir. I'm old enough to be your older brother, not your grandfather." The first meeting lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough for Claire to realize there was something magnetic about him. And dangerous. Victor observed her as if trying to decipher her, his eyes traveling over her face with an intensity that made her blush. "I hope you last longer than the others," he said, before disappearing down the dark corridors of the house. Claire was left alone in the library, heart beating fast and a strange sensation that her life had just taken a completely different direction. The silver keychain in her pocket seemed to warm up, as if reacting to the presence of this mysterious man. That first night, Claire could barely sleep. The room assigned to her was in the west wing of the house, A simple but comfortable room, with a window overlooking the coffee plantations that stretched down the mountain. The light of the full moon entered through the raw cotton curtains, creating ghostly designs on the whitewashed walls. She held the silver keychain between her fingers, observing the initials RM gleaming in the dark. Truth rests where time has stopped. What did her mother mean by that? And why did she feel that this phrase had some connection to the place where she now found herself? The next morning, Mrs. Connie showed her the routine of the house. The farm was immense, with more than 20 rooms in the main house, plus the staff quarters, stables, and the old slave quarters transformed into a private museum. Claire learned that Victor spent most of his time locked. In his office or riding alone on the property's trails, he rarely received visitors, and when he did, they were always business-related. "He's not a bad man," said Mrs. Connie as they prepared lunch, "but carrying so much pain alone changes a person. Since young Isabella disappeared, he's become someone else. Before he was cheerful, received friends, threw parties. Now he lives like a ghost in his own house." Claire felt a pang of curiosity about Isabella, but didn't dare ask more. Instead, she dedicated herself to getting to know every corner of the house. The library was her favorite place, with its hardwood shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with classics of American and international literature. It was there that she had her second encounter with Victor. She was up on a ladder, organizing books in alphabetical order, when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and saw him standing at the entrance, observing her with that disturbing intensity. "Do you like to read?" he asked, approaching. "Yes, sir. I mean, Victor, I always have." "What kind of story do you prefer?" Claire came down from the ladder, feeling her nervousness grow. Victor was closer now, and she could smell his cologne mixed with the aroma of coffee and something wilder, perhaps the smell of the forest that clings to the skin of those who ride in the open air. "I like stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary situations," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor smiled for the first time since she had arrived. It was a small smile, almost imperceptible, but it completely transformed his face. "Then you'll like living here," he said, taking a book from the shelf and handing it to her. "This house is full of extraordinary stories." When their hands touched, as she took the book, Claire felt an electric charge run up her arm. Victor also seemed to feel something, because his eyes narrowed and he held her hand for a second longer than necessary. "Be careful, Claire," he murmured, his voice loaded with something she couldn't identify. "Some stories can be dangerous, for those who don't know what they're getting into." The following days passed like a cautious dance between two predators who still didn't know if they were prey or hunter. Claire immersed herself in the farm routine with an almost obsessive dedication, as if keeping busy could silence the restlessness that grew inside her whenever she crossed paths with Victor in the corridors of the house. He seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Sometimes she heard him playing piano in the music room late at night, melancholy melodies that seemed to bleed through the walls. Other times, she found him on the front porch at dawn, drinking coffee and observing the workers in the coffee plantations with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Mrs. Connie had told her that Victor had taken over the farm at 25, when his father died in a car accident on the road to Richmond. "Young boy for so much responsibility," the caretaker would say, shaking her head. But he was always determined. He transformed this property into what it is today. Too bad happiness didn't accompany success. Claire began to notice strange details in the house. Family portraits removed from the walls, leaving only lighter marks on the paint. A room in the east wing that always remained locked, with Mrs. Connie changing the subject whenever she asked about it. And especially the way Victor sometimes stopped in the middle of a corridor, looking at nothing as if seeing ghosts. On Thursday, of her second week at the farm, Claire was cleaning the music room when she found a forgotten sheet of music inside the piano bench. "For Isabella, my eternal love, V," was handwritten on the first page. The music was a romantic waltz, delicate, full of promises that were never kept. "You shouldn't be touching that." Victor's voice made her jump with surprise. He was standing at the entrance to the room with an expression that mixed anger and pain. Claire felt the blood rise to her face, but she didn't lower her eyes. "I'm sorry. I was just cleaning and—" "Give it back." The order came dry, cutting. Claire extended the sheet music, but when he approached to take it, she couldn't contain herself. "You loved her very much." It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with a compassion that Victor wasn't prepared to receive. He stopped halfway, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know anything about it." "I know that someone who composes music like this can only love deeply." For a moment, something in Victor's face disarmed. Claire saw the man behind the mask of coldness, someone who was still bleeding from a wound that refused to heal, but the vulnerability lasted only seconds before he composed himself. "Isabella is dead," he said, his voice loaded with finality. "And I learned that love is a luxury that men like me cannot afford." "Men like you?" "Men who carry the weight of wrong choices." Victor took the sheet music from her hands, his fingers brushing hers for too long. Claire felt that electric shock again, more intense this time. Victor felt it too, because his breathing became heavier and his eyes dropped to her lips. "You should stay away from me, Claire," he murmured, but he didn't move away. "I'm not a good man." "Maybe you're not," she replied, surprising herself, with her own audacity. "But you're also not as bad as you want me to believe." They stayed like this for long seconds, the tension between them so palpable that Claire swore she could feel it vibrating in the air. Then Victor took a step back, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Finish the cleaning and go to your room," he said, but his voice had lost its hardness. "And Claire, don't enter the East Wing anymore. It's dangerous." "There." He left the room, leaving Claire with her heart racing and 1,000 questions in her head. What kind of danger could there be in the East Wing? And why did she feel that Victor wasn't just trying to protect her, but himself as well? That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The conversation with Victor echoed in her mind, especially the words about wrong choices and the weight he carried. There was something in the way he looked at her, as if he was constantly fighting against an impulse he couldn't control. At 3 a.m, she got up to drink water and heard footsteps in the corridor. She opened the door a crack and saw Victor walking toward the East Wing, carrying a half-empty bottle of whiskey. He stopped in front of the locked door, rested his forehead on the wood and stayed like that for long minutes, as if gathering courage to enter. Claire watched, fascinated, as he took a key from his pocket and opened the door. A soft light spilled into the corridor, and she could see that the room was perfectly preserved, as if time had stopped there. Victor entered and closed the door behind him. Too curious to resist, Claire left her room and approached the door. She put her ear to the wood and heard his voice, low and broken, as if he were talking to someone. "I brought a new housekeeper. She has eyes similar to yours, you know, and the same stubbornness." A long pause. "I know you wouldn't approve. You always said I needed to learn to forgive, but how can I forgive when I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness?" Claire felt her heart tighten. Victor was talking to Isabella, or at least to her memory, and there was something in the pain, in his voice, that made her want to enter and hug him, tell him that he deserved to be happy again. But then he said something that made her freeze. "Sometimes I look at Claire and think of Rachel. Is it a coincidence that she came here? Do the dead really rest in peace, or do they keep pulling the strings of fate to fix what was broken?" Rachel. Her mother. Victor knew her mother. Claire moved away from the door with blood roaring in her ears. She hadn't arrived at Westridge Farm by chance. There was a connection between her family and that place, something that Victor knew and she didn't. The silver keychain in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin, as if reacting to the proximity of the truth she had been looking for so long. Claire spent the entire night awake, moving the silver keychain between her fingers as she tried to fit the pieces of the puzzle that her life had become. Victor knew her mother. The phrase echoed in her mind like a disturbing mantra. "Sometimes I look at Claire and think of Rachel." How was this possible? Her mother had died when she was only 2 years old, and as far as she knew, had never left Copper Hill. But maybe she didn't know everything about Rachel. Maybe her grandmother had deliberately omitted parts of the story, as she always did when Claire asked questions about the past. "Some truths are too heavy for young shoulders," the old woman would say, crossing herself 3 times whenever Rachel's name was mentioned. The next morning, Claire decided to investigate. She started with the library, looking for old photo, albums or documents that might have escaped the cleaning that had clearly been done in the house. She searched shelves, drawers, spaces behind the books. That's when she found a folder forgotten between 2 volumes of Mark Twain. Inside the folder were newspaper clippings yellowed by time. The first was from 20 years ago. Young employee dies in accident in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Her mother. Claire's blood froze when she read the full name, Rachel Moreira Santos, 22 years old, from Copper Hill, the same age that Claire was now. The article was brief and evasive. It only said that Rachel worked as a housekeeper in an unidentified rural property and had fallen from a tower during a storm. The body was found 3 days later by workers. There were no signs of violence, and the case was filed as an accident. But there was something strange. The clipping was carefully cut out and saved, as if someone wanted to specifically preserve that news. And on the back, a handwritten note. "Truth rests where time has stopped. East Tower, March 15, 2005. The date of her mother's death, and the phrase identical to the one engraved on her keychain. Looking for something specific? Claire turned, around, instinctively hiding the folder behind her back. Victor was at the entrance to the library, but this time his posture was different, less defensive, more tired. As if he too were carrying a weight he could no longer sustain alone. "Just organizing," she lied, but knew he didn't believe her. Victor approached slowly, his eyes fixed on her face. "You have the same eyes she had, the same stubbornness too." Claire felt the air vanish from her lungs. "You knew my mother." It wasn't a question. Victor sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Claire had already learned to recognize as a sign that he was fighting with himself. "Rachel worked here for 6 months, in 2005. I was 19 years old and spending my college vacation at the farm." He stopped, looking out the window as if he could see the past projected on the coffee plantations. "She was special, intelligent, determined, not afraid of anything, not even of me." "What happened to her?" "She died." The answer came dry, definitive, but Claire noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in his voice. "She fell from the east tower during a storm. I found the body." The revelation hit Claire like a punch to the stomach. Victor had found her mother's body. Suddenly everything began to make sense. The way he looked at her, the constant tension, the comments about her coming here. "You think it wasn't an accident," she said, reading between the lines of what he wasn't saying. Victor stared at her for long seconds, as if measuring how much truth she could bear. "Your mother discovered things she shouldn't have discovered, about my family, about old business, about people who preferred to keep certain secrets buried." "What kind of secrets?" "The kind that can kill a person." The silence that followed was loaded with a tension different from what they had been building over the past few days. This time, it wasn't sexual desire or forbidden attraction. It was fear, complicity, and the awareness that Claire was walking on the same dangerous ground that had cost her mother's life. "That's why you hired me," she continued, connecting the dots. "You knew who I was from the beginning. I knew the moment I saw your name on the application letter, Rachel Santos. It couldn't be a coincidence." Victor moved closer, his dark eyes burning with intensity. "I thought maybe you'd come looking for answers, and I thought maybe I owed you some. And do you? I owe you your entire life." The answer came loaded with such deep guilt that Claire felt her chest tighten. Victor carried the responsibility for her mother's death as a personal burden, and now she was there, a living reminder of what he had failed to protect. "It wasn't your fault," she said, instinctively extending her hand to touch his arm. The touch was like a spark in dry gunpowder. Victor grabbed her hand, intertwining his fingers with an urgency that surprised her. His eyes dropped to her lips, and Claire felt the air between Them charged with electricity. You don't understand, he murmured, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. I fell in love with Rachel, and she died because I wasn't able to protect her. Now you're here with the same eyes, the same courage, walking into the same danger, and you what? And I'm falling in love with you too. The confession hung in the air between them like a bomb about to explode. Claire felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Victor was falling in love with her, but he had also fallen in love with her mother 20 years before. The complexity of the situation dazed her, but there was something stronger than confusion. The need to understand, to know the whole truth, to discover what had really happened to Rachel. Show me where she died, Claire asked, surprising them, both with the firmness in her voice. Claire. Show me the East Tower, I need to see. Victor studied her for long moments, as if trying to see how far her determination went. Finally, he nodded with a sharp movement of his head. After lunch. But Claire, once you know everything, there's no going back. Some truths change a person forever. Then let them change me, she replied, squeezing his hand. I came here looking for answers, Victor, and I'm not leaving without them. What neither of them knew was that, somewhere in the house, someone was watching, listening, and this person had no intention of letting Claire discover the truth that had cost her mother's life. The East Tower rose like a somber sentinel at the edge of the property, connected to the main house by a covered gallery that had been built in the 19th century. Claire had passed by it several times in the last few weeks, but always from a distance, and now she understood why Mrs. Connie avoided it so carefully. The stone structure was covered with ivy and moss, giving it a melancholic aspect that perfectly matched the dark clouds accumulating in the afternoon sky. Victor walked beside her in silence, tense like an animal about to attack or flee. My great-grandfather built this tower as an astronomical observatory, he said, breaking the silence, when they reached the base of the structure. Later it became a storage room, then a private library. When Rachel was here, I had transformed it into my personal refuge. Claire observed the heavy wooden door, painted faded blue. There was something disturbing about that entrance, as if she were looking at the mouth of a tunnel that led straight to the past. This is where you two met. It wasn't a question, and Victor didn't try to deny it. Rachel liked the silence here. She said it was the only place on the farm where she could think clearly. He took an old key from his pocket, hesitating before opening the door. Claire, are you sure you want to do this? I am. The door opened with a low groan of rusty hinges. The interior of the tower was exactly as Claire had imagined. A spiral staircase climbed up the circular wall, flanked by dusty shelves and furniture covered with white sheets. The light filtered through the high windows, created ghostly designs on the stone floor. Victor guided her to the second floor, where a small office had been set up. A dark wooden desk, 2 worn leather armchairs, and a window that offered a spectacular view of the coffee plantations and the mountains in the distance. This is where she used to come read in the afternoon, said Victor, touching the back of one of the armchairs. Rachel was voracious for knowledge. She read everything she could get her hands on. Literature, history, politics, economics. She questioned everything, wanted to understand how the world worked. Claire approached the desk and noticed that there were papers scattered on it, as if someone had run out in the middle of important work. Pages yellowed by time, some with handwritten notes, others with numbers and calculations. What are these papers? Documents that Rachel was analyzing before she died. Old financial records of the farm, land purchase contracts, birth and death certificates from the region. Victor approached, his voice becoming deeper. She had discovered irregularities in the records. Lands that were purchased for values well below market, suspicious deaths of small landowners who refused to sell, falsified documents. Claire felt a chill down her spine. Your family was stealing land. My grandfather and great-grandfather built this empire using methods that wouldn't withstand a serious investigation. Bribery, intimidation, and when necessary. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Murder. Rachel discovered at least 6 suspicious deaths over 50 years, always small farmers who refused to sell their properties, always filed as accidents or suicides. Claire picked up one of the papers, recognizing her mother's delicate handwriting. It was a list of names, dates, and circumstances of death. At the end of the page, a note in red. Need to confront Michael Westridge. He is the key to everything. Michael was my father, said Victor, reading over her shoulder. Rachel scheduled a meeting with him on the night she died, said she had enough evidence to destroy our family and that she would turn it over to the police if he didn't confess everything and compensate the victims' families. And you knew about this? Not at the time. I was just a boy in love who believed that my family had built its fortune with honest work. Victor moved away, walking to the window. I only discovered the truth years later, when my father was dying and confessed everything. Rachel had died because he couldn't let her expose the family's crimes. The revelation hit Claire like a punch to the stomach. Your father killed my mother. Not directly, he hired someone to make it look like an accident. A fall from the tower during the storm. Victor turned to face her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I've spent 20 years carrying this guilt, Claire. 20 years knowing that the woman I loved died because of my last name. Claire felt her legs weaken. She leaned on the desk, trying to process the enormity of what she had just discovered. Her mother hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered for discovering the truth about old crimes. And Victor, the man she was falling in love with, was the son of the man who had ordered Rachel's death. That's why you live like a ghost, she said, finally understanding. That's why you don't believe you deserve to be happy. How can I deserve happiness when it was built on so much blood? Victor approached, extending his hand as if he wanted to touch her but not daring to. Claire, I've spent all these years trying to compensate for my family's crimes. I returned lands, paid reparations, renovated houses. But none of this can bring Rachel back. None of this can undo what was done. And Isabella, did she also discover the truth? Victor's face hardened. Isabella was different. She knew everything from the beginning. In fact, she was the one who showed me the documents that my father had hidden. Said she wanted to help me clean the family name. But I discovered she had other plans. Isabella wanted to use the information for blackmail, not for justice. She had approached me out of interest, not love. When I confronted her about this on the night of our engagement, Victor hesitated, as if the words were poison in his mouth. She said she would use Rachel's death against me if I ended our relationship. That she would tell everyone I was complicit in the murder. And then she disappeared. Ran away with Lawrence, my cousin. They took money, important documents, and disappeared the same night. They left fake letters insinuating suicide, but I knew it was staged. Claire absorbed everything in silence, feeling as if she were assembling a macabre puzzle where each piece revealed a new layer of betrayal and pain. Her mother had died trying to do justice. Victor had lost 2 women he loved because of his family's sins. And she was there, at the center of all this, not knowing if she was a victim or an instrument of some kind of cosmic justice. That's when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured footsteps of someone who didn't want to be heard. Victor also noticed his body tensing like that of a feline. Someone's coming up, whispered Claire. That's impossible. Only I have the key to this tower. But the footsteps continued climbing, getting closer and closer, and when the figure appeared at the top of the stairs, Claire felt the world collapse beneath her feet. It was a blonde woman, elegant, with eyes as cold as ice, a woman who should have been dead for 10 years. Hello, Victor, said Isabella with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I missed you. The silence that followed Isabella's appearance was deafening. Claire felt as if the air had been sucked from the tower, leaving only a suffocating tension that made her heart beat erratically. Victor was paralyzed, looking at the woman who had disappeared from his life 10 years before, as if he were seeing her ghost. Isabella had changed. She was still beautiful, but there was something predatory in her blue eyes, a calculating coldness that didn't exist in the photos Claire had seen around the house. She wore an expensive navy blue dress, blonde hair tied in an impeccable bun, and moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly the power she wielded over the people around her. Aren't you going to welcome me? Asked Isabella, descending, the last step with the grace of a dancer. Her eyes passed over Claire with barely disguised contempt before fixing again on Victor. 10 years is a long time to be away from home. You're dead, said Victor, finally finding his voice. There was something broken in his tone, as if those words were his last anchor of sanity. Death is a very relative concept, don't you think? Isabella laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed off the stone walls. I prefer to say I've been traveling, seeing the world, learning new things. Claire observed the exchange between them as if she were watching a macabre theatre piece. There was too much history between Victor and Isabella, layers of pain and betrayal that she couldn't fully decipher. But one thing was clear: Isabella's presence had changed something fundamental in the air, as if she brought with her a threat that Claire still couldn't comprehend. How did you get in here? Asked Victor, instinctively taking a step forward, placing himself between Claire and Isabella. Oh, Victor, this tower has more than one entrance, you should know that. Isabella approached the desk where Rachel's documents were, touching them with her fingertips as if they were precious relics. I see you finally decided to share family secrets with someone. How touching. What do you want, Isabella? Straight. To the point as always. She turned to face him, and Claire could see the change in her expression. The mask of civility slipped for a second, revealing something much darker underneath. I want what was always mine by right. I want Westridge. Famtiwa, you ran away with Lawrence, abandoned everything. Lawrence is dead, darling. The coldness with which she said this made Claire feel a chill. Died in a car accident in Argentina 3 years ago. Very convenient, actually. He was becoming a nuisance. Victor closed his hands into fists. You killed my cousin. Prove it. Isabella smiled, but there was no humor in that smile. Lawrence was always too weak for this game. He thought we could live forever on the run, spending the money we took. He didn't understand that some battles need to be fought to the end. Claire finally found her voice. What battle? Isabella turned to her for the first time, studying her with calculating eyes. Ah, yes, Rachel's little daughter. I must say the resemblance is impressive. Same stubborn eyes, same lifted chin. I hope you're smarter than your mother. Leave Claire out of this, said Victor, his voice loaded with a threat that made Isabella raise an amused eyebrow. But Claire is right at the center of all this, isn't she? Isabella walked to the window, observing the landscape as if she owned the place. After all, it was her mommy's death that started this whole beautiful story of guilt and redemption. Did you really think you could get rid of the past by being nice, Victor? Returning lands, paying reparations? I did what was right. You did what was stupid. Isabella turned abruptly, her eyes flashing with anger. You destroyed half our fortune trying to clear your conscience. And for what? Rachel, still dead. The other victims are still dead. You didn't save anyone. Claire felt anger grow inside her like a red wave. How dare you talk about my mother like that? Your mother was a romantic idiot who believed in justice and truth. Admirable qualities, but impractical in the real world. Isabella stared at her without blinking. She fell in love with Victor and thought she could change him, save him from the family's sins. How pathetic. Isabella, enough. Victor's voice was low, dangerous. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Your precious Rachel died because she was too naive to understand the rules of the game, and now you've brought her daughter to repeat the same story. Isabella laughed again, a sound that made Claire want to cover her ears. It's almost poetic. Why did you come back? Asked Claire, struggling to keep her voice steady. What do you really want? I want justice, my dear, justice for me. Isabella took a leather folder from her bag and threw it on the desk. I have documents here that prove Victor knew about the murders committed by his family much earlier than he claims. I have letters exchanged between him and his father, recorded conversations, suspicious bank transfers. That's a lie, said Victor, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. Is it? Then how do you explain this transfer of $2 million to a ghost account 3 days before Rachel's death? Isabella pulled a document from the folder, waving it in the air. Or this email where you ask your father about resolving the housekeeper problem in a definitive way? Claire felt the world spin. She looked at Victor, searching in his eyes for some sign that Isabella was lying. But what she saw was guilt. Deep, corrosive guilt, that confirmed at least part of the accusations. "Victor?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "Claire, I can explain—" "There's nothing to explain," interrupted Isabella, triumphant. "Victor always knew what kind of man he was. He simply preferred to pretend innocence to be able to look at himself in the mirror. But deep down he's exactly like his father and grandfather, a murderer." "I didn't know he was going to kill her," exploded Victor, turning to Claire with desperation in his eyes. "I knew my father was worried about Rachel's investigations, knew she had discovered things that could destroy us, but I thought he was just going to, I don't know, offer her money, convince her to stop." "You transferred $2 million, said Claire, feeling nauseous. $2 million. It was to bribe her, to convince her to give up the investigations and leave. I never, ever imagined that—" Victor ran his hands through his hair, desperate. "Claire, you have to believe me. I loved Rachel. I would never harm her." "But you allowed it to happen," replied Claire, the words coming out like razor blades. "You gave your father the means to kill her." The silence that followed was broken only by Isabella's satisfied laugh. "What a touching scene. But now that all the secrets are on the table, we can talk business. Victor, you have two options. You transfer the farm property to me voluntarily, or I turn these documents over to the authorities and you spend the rest of your life in prison. And if I refuse? Then Claire here will discover that she's not just the daughter of a victim. She's the daughter of a victim murdered by the man she's falling in love with." Isabella smiled at Claire with false compassion. "It must be devastating to discover that the love of your life has his hands dirty with your mother's blood, isn't it, dear?" Claire looked at Victor, seeing him for the first time without the lenses of attraction and budding romance. She saw a man who had contributed, even if indirectly, to her mother's death. A man who carried a guilt that was devouring him alive, but who had chosen to seduce the victim's daughter instead of confessing the truth. "I need to get out of here," she said, heading for the stairs. "Claire, wait. Don't touch me." She shouted, turning to face him. "Don't dare touch me with those hands." She ran down the stairs, leaving behind Isabella's triumphant laughter and Victor's desperate shouts calling her name. She needed to think, needed to breathe, needed to figure out what to do with the truth that had become too big to carry alone. Claire ran through the covered gallery as if she were fleeing from hell itself. Isabella's words echoed in her mind. Like funeral bells, "The love of your life has his hands dirty with your mother's blood." Each step on the creaking wooden floor seemed to confirm the horrible truth she was trying to deny. When she reached her room, she locked the door and let herself slide down the wall until she sat on the floor. The tears came in waves, 20, years of pain and abandonment mixing with the newly discovered betrayal. Victor was not just the son of the man who had killed her mother. He had participated, even if indirectly, in Rachel's murder. $2 million. The amount echoed in her mind like a death sentence. Victor had handed Rachel over as if she were a commodity to be negotiated, an obstacle to be removed. And then, for 20 years he had lived with that guilt, pretending to be a victim, hiding behind gestures of redemption that could never erase the blood from his hands. But there was something that didn't fit. Claire wiped away the tears and tried to think clearly. If Victor had really consciously participated in her mother's murder, why had he hired her? Why had he revealed the truth about the Westridge family? Why had he chosen precisely her, the victim's daughter, to share his secrets with? A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Miss Claire?" It was Mrs. Connie's voice. "May I come in?" Claire opened the door and found the caretaker carrying a tray with chamomile tea and homemade cookies. The kind eyes of the older woman showed a maternal concern that made Claire collapse in tears again. "Come here, my child." Mrs. Connie pulled her into the room and closed the door behind her. "I know you discovered the truth about your mother." Claire moved away, surprised. "You knew?" "Always knew. I was here when Rachel died." Mrs. Connie placed the tray on the dresser and sat on the bed, signaling for Claire to approach. "I've worked in this house for 40 years, saw a lot, heard a lot, and kept quiet about a lot too. Why did you never tell the truth?" "Because some truths are too dangerous to be told at the wrong time." The caretaker took Claire's hands, warming them, between her own. But now that Isabella is back, there's no more hiding anything. Victor participated in my mother's death. Yes and no. Mrs. Connie sighed deeply. Young Victor was in love with Rachel, desperately in love. When his father discovered about the investigations, he was furious. Said the family would be destroyed, that everyone would go to jail. And Victor agreed to give the money. Victor was young, influenced by his father, and desperate to save Rachel. Michael Westridge said the money was to convince her to stop the investigations and leave, that it would be a new beginning for the two of them somewhere else. Mrs. Connie shook her head sadly. The boy believed his father, thought he was saving Rachel's life, not signing her death warrant. Claire absorbed the words in silence. There was a difference between consciously participating in a murder and being deceived into contributing to it. But did the difference make the result less painful? After Rachel died, Victor confronted his father. There was a terrible fight. The boy discovered he had been used, that the money wasn't for bribing, but for hiring the killer. Mrs. Connie wiped a tear that had run down Claire's face. Victor never forgave himself for being so naive. And Isabella, how does she fit into all this? Mrs. Connie's face hardened. Isabella was always bad. Even as a child, when she came to visit the family, she already demonstrated a cruelty that gave me chills. She approached Victor a few years after Rachel's death, pretending love, but in reality she was after the family's secrets. For blackmail. Exactly, she wanted power, wanted control. When Victor discovered her true motives and threatened to end the relationship, Isabella showed her claws, said she would use Rachel's death against him, that she would tell everyone he was a murderer. Then she ran away with Lawrence. Ran away but never stopped planning her. Revenge. Isabella is the type of person who doesn't forget an offense, and she considers Victor's refusal as the greatest offense of all. Claire stood up and walked to the window, observing the movement of workers in the coffee plantations. Everything seemed normal out there, but she knew nothing would ever be normal in her life again. She had discovered the truth about her mother's death, but she had also discovered that she was falling in love with the man who, even without intention, had contributed to Rachel's murder. Mrs. Connie, I need to see the documents that Isabella showed. I need to know exactly what she has against Victor. Girl, that's dangerous. Isabella won't hesitate to harm you if she thinks you're getting in the way of her plans. She already harmed my family once. I won't let her do it again. Claire turned, and Mrs. Connie saw something different in her eyes, a determination that wasn't there before, a strength that very much resembled Rachel. Where is the red room? The one Isabella occupied when she was engaged to Victor? In the East Wing, near the tower. But girl, my mother died trying to discover the truth about this family. I'm not going to honor her memory by running away at the first difficulty. Claire took the silver keychain, holding it tightly. Truth rests where time has stopped. Maybe it's time to make time start moving again. Mrs. Connie studied Claire's face for long moments, seeing in her echoes of the brave young woman who had worked in that house 20 years before. If you're determined to do this, at least don't go alone. There are things in this house that not even Victor knows. What do you mean? I mean that the Westridge secrets didn't die with Michael, and that Isabella isn't the only person who knows where the bodies are buried. The caretaker got up, heading for the door. Tonight, after everyone is asleep, meet me in the kitchen. It's time for you to meet someone who can help you. Who? Elijah, the gardener. He's deaf, but sees better than anyone on this property, and he kept secrets about your mother that even I don't know. After Mrs. Connie left, Claire sat on the bed and tried to organize her thoughts. She was at the center of a web of lies, revenge, and guilt that extended for generations. Victor was both victim and perpetrator. Isabella was a real threat who wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who got in the way of her plans. And she, Claire, was the daughter of a woman who had died for wanting to do the right thing. The afternoon fell with the promise of a storm. Dark clouds accumulated over the mountains, bringing with them winds that made the windows of the house beat like war drums. Claire observed the first drops of rain running down the glass and made a decision. She wouldn't run away as Isabella expected. She wouldn't hide as Victor had been doing for 20 years. She would discover the whole truth, no matter how painful it was, and then decide what to do with it. Her mother had been silenced for trying to expose the crimes of the Westridge family, But Claire would not be silenced. She would finish what Rachel had started, no matter the cost. The approaching storm seemed a presage of what was to come, and Claire was ready to face any storm, no matter how devastating it might be. The storm arrived with fury, transforming the night into a spectacle of lightning and thunder that made the entire structure of the big house tremble. Claire waited until she was sure everyone was asleep before leaving her room, barefoot to not make noise on the wooden floor. The corridors were plunged into a darkness that seemed to have a life of its own, interrupted only by the flashes of lightning that entered through the windows. The kitchen was in the oldest part of the house, a spacious room with a wood stove, marble countertops, and a permanent aroma of coffee and spices. Mrs. Connie was there, as promised, accompanied by a small man with graying hair that Claire recognized as Elijah, the gardener. "He can't hear but reads lips perfectly," explained Mrs. Connie, "and he has a memory that stores every detail of the last 40 years on this property." Elijah waved to Claire with a gentle smile, his intelligent eyes studying her face with an intensity that left her slightly uncomfortable. He made some gestures with his hands, and Mrs. Connie translated. "He says you're the image of Rachel when she was your age, not just physically, but in the way you carry your head, in the determination in your eyes." Claire approached Elijah, speaking slowly so he could read her lips. "You knew my mother?" The gardener nodded vigorously, then went to an old cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. He removed some loose boards from the bottom and took out a wooden box wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside the box were letters, photographs, and a notebook with a worn leather cover. Rachel asked him to keep this in case something happened to her, explained Mrs. Connie, as Elijah placed the items on the table, said that if one day her daughter came looking for answers, he should hand over everything. Claire took the notebook with trembling hands. On the first page, her mother's delicate handwriting, "For Claire, my beloved daughter. If you're reading this, it means you've discovered the truth about my death, and it means you're strong enough to do what I couldn't finish." The following pages contained a meticulous investigation into the crimes of the Westridge family. Rachel had documented not only the suspicious deaths of small landowners, but also a network of corruption that extended for decades. Bribes to politicians, bought judges, planted evidence, intimidated witnesses. But there was something more. In the last entry of the notebook, dated the day before Rachel's death, she had discovered a connection that changed everything. Michael Westridge. "Didn't act alone," Claire read aloud. "He had a partner, someone from the family who helped him orchestrate the crimes and then cover them up, someone with access to legal documents, someone who intimately knew the victims' families." Claire turned the page and found a name that made her freeze. Mary Ellen Westridge, Victor's aunt. "Aunt Lena," whispered Mrs. Connie. "She was the family lawyer. Died 15 years ago, shortly after Victor took over the farm." "Died how?" asked Claire, although she already suspected the answer. Elijah made quick gestures and Mrs. Connie translated reluctantly. "He says Mary Ellen was found dead in her home in Richmond. Officially it was a heart attack, but he always thought it was suspicious." Claire continued reading. Rachel had discovered that Mary Ellen was who really commanded the family's criminal operations, using Michael as a facade. And she had discovered something more disturbing. Mary Ellen had had an illegitimate daughter, raised away from the family, but who knew all the secrets. "Isabella," murmured Claire, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. "Isabella is Mary Ellen's daughter." The silence that followed was broken by a thunderclap that made the windows shake. Mrs. Connie and Elijah exchanged worried looks. "If that's true," said the caretaker, "then Isabella didn't come back just for revenge. She came back because she believes the farm is hers by right of inheritance." "And has the documents to prove it," added Claire, finally understanding the game Isabella was playing. "She doesn't just want to destroy Victor. She wants to take his place as the legitimate heir of the family." Elijah pointed to one of the photographs in the box. It was an old image, in black and white, of Mary Ellen next to a man Claire didn't recognize. On the back a note, "Ellen and Robert Vance, 1985. "Vance," murmured Claire, "Isabella's maiden name." Girl, said Mrs. Connie, her voice loaded with urgency. If Isabella is really Mary Ellen's daughter, then she knows secrets that not even Victor imagines. And that makes her much more dangerous than we thought. That's when they heard footsteps on the back porch, slow, measured footsteps of someone trying not to be heard. Elijah moved with surprising agility for his age, extinguishing the candles. That illuminated the kitchen and gesturing for everyone to be silent. The back door opened slowly and a hooded figure entered, shaking off the rainwater. When the person lowered the hood, Claire almost screamed in surprise. It was Victor, soaked and with a desperate expression on his face. "Claire," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Thank God you're okay. Isabella left the farm an hour ago, and I was afraid she might have done something." "What are you doing here?" Claire instinctively moved away, still hurt by the revelations of the previous day. "Looking for you. We need to talk." Victor looked at Mrs. Connie and Elijah, noticing for the first time the open box on the table. "What is this?" "The truth about your family," responded Claire, raising Rachel's notebook. "The whole truth." Victor approached, his eyes widening when he recognized Rachel's handwriting. "She did a complete investigation. More than that, she discovered that your Aunt Mary Ellen was the real head of the criminal operations, and discovered that Mary Ellen had a daughter." Claire looked at him directly. "Isabella is your cousin, Victor, and she came back to claim the inheritance she believes is hers by right." Victor's face paled. "That's impossible. Aunt Lena never had children." "Yes, she did. An illegitimate daughter who was raised away from the family." Claire showed the photograph of Mary Ellen with Robert Vance. "Isabella Vance, your cousin and daughter of the true criminal mind behind the Westridges." Victor dropped into a chair, running his hands through his wet hair. "If this is true, then Isabella has more right to the inheritance than you imagine," completed Claire. "And she has the documents to prove not only the family's crimes, but also her legitimacy as an heir." "No," said Victor, standing up abruptly. "I won't let her destroy everything I've tried to build. I won't let her use Rachel's death to get what she wants." "And what do you intend to do?" asked Claire, seeing something dangerous in his eyes. "Kill her like your father killed my mother?" The words came out harsher than Claire intended, but Victor received them like slaps. He stared at her for long seconds, pain and determination mixing on his face. "I'm going to do what I should have done 20 years ago," he said, heading for the door. "I'm going to tell the whole truth to the authorities. About my father, about my aunt, about everything, even if it means losing the farm and going to prison." "Victor, wait!" Claire stood up, but he was already leaving. "I can't wait any longer, Claire. I've waited 20 years to do the right thing. And if this is the only way to protect you and honor Rachel's memory, then that's what I'm going to do." He disappeared into the storm, leaving Claire with her heart racing and the certainty that she was about to lose the man she loved to the same obsession with justice that had killed her mother. Claire didn't think twice before running after Victor. The storm had intensified, transforming the property into a labyrinth of shadows and water. The lightning illuminated the terrain in stroboscopic flashes, revealing Victor's silhouette running toward the main house. "Victor!" she shouted, but her voice was lost in the roar of the wind and thunder. When she finally reached him on the front porch, he was on the phone, dialing the police. His hands trembled, whether from cold or emotion, Claire couldn't tell. "Hello? Blue Ridge Police Department. I need to report murders that happened at Westridge Farm." Claire snatched the phone from his hand. "Have you lost your mind? If you confess now, Isabella will disappear and we'll never be able to prove that she's the real culprit for the recent crimes." "Claire, I can't live with this anymore. 20 years carrying this guilt. 20 years pretending I can fix what was broken." Victor's eyes shone with tears and rain. "Your mother died because of my cowardice. I won't let the same thing happen to you." "Then fight. Fight for me, fight for us, fight for my mother's memory." Claire held his face between her hands, forcing him to look her in the eyes. "Confessing now won't bring justice, Victor. It will just hand victory to Isabella on a silver platter." They were interrupted by the sound of slow clapping. Isabella emerged from the shadows of the porch, elegant even soaked by the rain, as if the storm were just a dramatic setting prepared especially for her. "What a touching scene," she said, her tone dripping sarcasm. "The couple of lovers discovered the truth, and now wants to do the right thing. How romantic." "Isabella," Victor positioned himself in front of Claire instinctively. "We know who you really are." "Oh, yes? And who am I, dear cousin?" Isabella laughed, but there was something dangerous in her blue eyes. "Am I the bastard daughter that your family hid for 30 years, the legitimate heir to the Westridge crimes? Or am I just an injured woman who came back to claim what's rightfully hers?" "You're a murderer," said Claire, stepping out from behind Victor. "You killed Lawrence." Lawrence was weak, too weak to understand that some battles need to be fought. "To the end." Isabella approached, her movements feline in the penumbra. "But you two, you're different. You have the same self-destructive obstinacy that Rachel had." "Leave Rachel out of this," growled Victor. "Why should I? Rachel is the center of all this. The poor thing fell in love with the Westridge heir, thought she could change him, save him from the family's sins." Isabella stopped a few meters from them, the wind whipping her blonde hair. "Exactly what Claire is doing now." "The difference is that I won't die silently," replied Claire, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "And I won't let you destroy what's left of decency in this family." "Decent?" Isabella laughed out loud. "Darling, there's nothing decent about the Westridge family. We're all murderers, thieves and liars. The only difference is that some of us accept what we are and others pretend to be saints." "If you want the farm, you can have it," said Victor, taking Claire by surprise. "I give up everything, but leave Claire out of this." "How generous of you, cousin, but I don't just want the farm." Isabella took a pistol from her bag, pointing it casually at them. "I want justice. Justice for my mother, who was murdered when she tried to distance herself from the family business. Justice for me, who was raised as an orphan while you lived. In abundance, built with blood." Claire felt her blood freeze. "Your mother didn't die of a heart attack. Mary Ellen discovered that Michael was planning to kill her to keep the entire inheritance. She tried to flee, take the documents that incriminated the family, start a new life away from all this." Isabella's eyes filled with tears of anger. "Michael found her before she could escape, poisoned her coffee and forged the heart attack." "You were just a child," said Victor, his voice loaded with horror. "How can you know all this?" "Because I was there, dear cousin. An 8-year-old girl hidden in the closet watching her own uncle kill my mother." Isabella wiped the tears with the back of her free hand, the gun still pointed at them. "I've spent the last 25 years planning my revenge, first against Michael, who died before I could do justice, then against you, who inherited the family's crimes as if they were titles of nobility." The revelation hit Claire like a punch to the stomach. Isabella wasn't just an ambitious woman in search of wealth. She was a traumatized child who had grown up nurturing a thirst for revenge, and now had the power to destroy them all. "What do you want from us?" asked Claire, trying to buy time while thinking of a way out. "I want you to feel the same pain I felt. I want Victor to see the woman he loves die in front of him, just as I saw my mother die." Isabella adjusted the aim of the gun. "And then I want him to live with that guilt for the rest of his life." "You won't succeed," said Claire, taking a step forward, "because I'm not my mother, and I won't die without a fight." "Claire, no." Victor tried to hold her, but she was already moving. What happened next was a blur of movement and adrenaline. Claire threw herself to the side at the exact moment Isabella fired, the shot echoing through the stormy night. Victor took advantage of the distraction to launch himself at Isabella, trying to disarm her. The two rolled across the wet floor of the porch, fighting for control of the gun. Claire stood up, dazed, and saw that Victor was at a disadvantage. Isabella was more agile, more desperate, fueled by decades of accumulated anger. That's when Claire saw the bronze candlestick on the porch table. Without hesitation, she grabbed the object and raised it above her head. "Get off him!" she shouted. Isabella looked up, seeing Claire with the raised candlestick, and for a second her expression changed. It was no longer the cold and calculating woman who had terrorized everyone that night. It was a frightened child, lost in her own thirst for revenge. "You don't understand," said Isabella, her voice breaking. "They destroyed my family, destroyed my life. I have nothing left but this revenge." "You have a choice," replied Claire, without lowering the candlestick. "You can continue living in the past, being a prisoner of the pain that others caused, or you can choose a different future. It's very easy to say that when you haven't lost everything." "I lost my mother," exploded Claire. "Lost my childhood, my family, my chance to know the woman who gave birth to me, but I won't let the pain turn me into a monster." For a moment, silence reigned on the porch, broken only by the sound of the rain and distant thunder. Isabella looked at Claire as if seeing her for the first time, recognizing in her a pain that mirrored her own. That's when the police lights began to approach on the dirt road. Someone had heard the shot and called the police. "It's over, Isabella," said Victor, slowly rising. "You can hand over the gun and tell your version of the story, or you can resist and die right here. The choice is yours." Isabella looked at the gun in her hands, then at the approaching lights, and finally at Claire and Victor. For a moment, Claire thought she was going to shoot again, but then Isabella let the pistol fall to the wet floor. "Maybe it is time to stop running," she murmured, finally surrendering to the weight of 3 decades of pain and loneliness. The red and blue lights of the police car transformed the stormy night into a surreal kaleidoscope. 3 officers got out of the car, weapons drawn, but lowered them when they saw Isabella sitting on the porch floor with her hands up, completely defeated. "Is she armed?" shouted the sheriff, a tall man with a graying moustache whom Claire recognized from town. "The gun is on the ground," responded Victor, kicking the pistol away. She surrendered. What followed was a whirlwind of police procedures. Isabella was handcuffed and placed in the car, but not before looking one last time at Claire and Victor. There was something different in her eyes now, no longer the calculating coldness, but a strange mixture of relief and resignation. "You don't know what you've done," she said as she was escorted. "You've freed me from a prison I built myself." The sheriff, who introduced himself as Dr. Matthews, asked that everyone go inside to give statements. The living room of the big house was transformed into an improvised interrogation room, with Mrs. Connie serving hot coffee while each one related their version of events. Claire told about the discovery of her mother's notebook, about the crimes of the Westridge family, about Isabella's true identity. Victor confirmed everything, adding details about his father's deathbed confession and about Isabella's attempt to blackmail the family. "And the documents she said she had?" asked the sheriff, taking notes. "They're in the red room in the East Wing," responded Victor. "But, Sheriff, there's something I need to confess." Claire looked at him, her heart racing. Victor was about to incriminate himself, even after all they had discovered about Isabella. "I had partial knowledge of my father's criminal activities. When Rachel Santos began to investigate the family, I financially contributed to what I believed was a bribe to make her stop." Victor looked directly at the sheriff. "I didn't know the money would be used to hire a killer, but my participation makes me an accomplice in her death." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the rain that was beginning to diminish outside. The sheriff studied Victor for long seconds before responding. "Mr. Westridge, from what I understand from the testimonies, you were a minor at the time and were deceived by your father about the true intentions of the payment. But you've spent the last 20 years trying to repair the damage caused by your family, returned lands, paid reparations, transformed this property into an example of social responsibility." The sheriff closed his notebook. "This will be taken into consideration during the investigation." It was 2 more hours of testimonies and procedures before the police left, taking Isabella and promising to return the next day for a more detailed investigation. When they finally were alone, Claire and Victor found themselves in the library, surrounded by the books that had witnessed the beginning of everything. "So," said Claire, leaning on the table where days before she had found the sheet music dedicated, to Isabella. "It's over." "It's over," repeated Victor, but his voice carried an uncertainty that she recognized. "Claire, about everything you discovered about me. You were a 19-year-old boy, in love and influenced by a manipulative father." Claire turned to face him, seeing him really for the first time without the lenses of anger or blind passion. "You're not responsible for your family's crimes, Victor, and you've spent the last 20 years proving that. But your mother..." "My mother died because she chose to fight for the truth, and if she were here now, I'm sure she would be proud to see that you made the same decision." Claire approached him, gently touching his face. "My mother wouldn't want me to nurture hate. She would want me to choose love." Victor closed his eyes, resting his forehead on hers. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing. And I choose you, Victor. I choose us." Claire smiled, feeling as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "But we have to promise something to each other." "What?" "No more secrets. No more lies, even if they're to protect. We build something new together, based on total truth." Victor pulled her into his arms, hugging her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had collapsed and rebuilt itself in a single night. "I promise," he murmured against her hair. "And Claire, I love you, not because you remind me of Rachel, but because you are unique, because you are strong where I am weak, brave where I am cowardly." "I love you too," she responded, feeling the truth of these words echo in every cell of her body. "I love the man you've chosen to become, not despite your past, but because of how you dealt with it." They stayed like this for long minutes, embraced in the silence of the library, listening to the storm calm down outside. Claire knew there was still much to be resolved: the police investigation, the future of the farm, the traumas of both that would need time to heal. But for the first time since she had arrived at Westridge Farm, she felt peace. She had found the answers she was looking for about her mother. She had discovered that love could survive even the most painful truths, and she had chosen to build a future alongside the man she loved, not despite his complicated past, but walking with him towards something better. "What do we do now?" she asked, moving away to look him in the eyes. "Now we rebuild," said Victor, smiling for the first time in weeks. "We rebuild the farm, we rebuild our history, we rebuild our family, but this time, we do everything the right way." "Our family?" "If you want, if you stay." The vulnerability in his voice moved her deeply. "Claire, I know it's too early to say this, but I want to spend the rest of my life compensating for the mistakes of the past, and I want to do it by your side." Claire smiled, feeling tears of happiness run down her face. "Then you better prepare, because I have some ideas about how to use this property to honor my mother's memory." "What kind of ideas?" "How about we transform part of the farm into a support center for families of violence victims? A place where people like us can find justice and start over?" Claire saw Victor's eyes light up with the idea. "We can call it the Rachel Santos Institute." "It's perfect," he said, taking her hands. "It's exactly what your mother would want." Outside, the storm had completely passed, giving way to a starry sky that reflected in the puddles across the patio. It was as if nature itself was celebrating. The end of an era of secrets and the beginning of something new and luminous. Claire looked out the library window and imagined she could feel Rachel's presence there, finally at peace, knowing that her daughter had found not only the truth she was looking for, but also the love she deserved. The silver keychain in her pocket no longer burned. It was warm, welcoming, like a final blessing from a mother to a daughter who had chosen forgiveness instead of revenge. "Truth rests where time has stopped," murmured Claire, remembering the phrase engraved on the keychain. "And now time can start moving again," completed Victor, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of new beginnings and eternal love. 6 months later, Westridge Farm had transformed into something that neither Claire nor Victor could have imagined on that stormy night. The Rachel Santos Institute occupied the east wing of the property, exactly where Isabella's red room used to be. The East Tower, scene of so much suffering, had been converted into a specialized library on human rights and social justice. Claire walked through the gardens redesigned by Elijah, who had become a kind of silent guardian of the Institute. Colorful, flowers replaced the somber flower beds of before, and the sound of children's laughter echoed across the patio, where a daycare now operated for children of women in vulnerable situations. "The first class of graduates is ready," said Mrs. Connie, approaching with a folder in her hands. The caretaker had become the administrative coordinator of the institute, bringing her decades of experience to help manage the project. 15 women who managed to rebuild their lives, find work, free themselves from abusive relationships. Claire smiled, leafing through the documents. Each story there represented a victory, a second chance, a saved life. "My mother would be proud," she murmured, touching the silver keychain that she now wore as a necklace. "And you? Are you happy?" asked Mrs. Connie, with the maternal affection she had developed for Claire over the months. "Happier than I thought possible," responded Claire honestly. It was true. The last months had been full of hard work, but also wonderful discoveries. She and Victor had built a relationship based on the total transparency they had promised that night. There were no more secrets between them, no more shadows from the past to haunt the present. Isabella's trial had happened 2 months before. With the help of a good lawyer hired by Victor himself, she had managed a deal that saved her from a life sentence. Isabella was serving her sentence in a semi-open regime, doing therapy and working on social projects. Claire had visited her once and had been surprised to find a woman very different from the one who had terrorized the farm. "Thank you for not letting me die that night," Isabella had said during the visit. "You gave me something I haven't had in decades, hope that it's possible to start over." Claire heard the sound of familiar footsteps approaching and turned to see Victor walking toward her. He was returning from Richmond, where he had spent the day in meetings with investors interested in supporting the institute. The smile on his face told her everything she needed to know about the result of the negotiations. "We got the funding to expand the project," he said, embracing her by the waist. "We'll be able to help twice as many families next year." "Really?" Claire moved away to look him in the eyes, seeing in them the same enthusiasm she felt. 3 companies want to become permanent partners, and there's more. Victor smiled mischievously. "The governor wants to use our model as an example for other states. We could have Rachel Santos institutes all over the United States." Claire felt tears of joy run down her face. The idea that her mother's name could help thousands of people across the country was more than she had ever dared to dream. "There's something else I want to tell you," said Victor, and Claire noticed a change in his tone. There was nervousness there, but also a determination that she recognized. "What is it?" Instead of answering, Victor knelt right there in the middle of Elijah's flowery gardens, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. Claire put her hand to her chest, her heart racing. "Claire Santos, you came into my life like a storm that destroyed everything that was false and built something true in its place." His voice was emotional, but firm. "You taught me that it's possible to carry the past without being a prisoner to it, that it's possible to honor the dead by living with courage." Claire looked at him through tears, hardly able to believe what was happening. "Will you marry me? Will you build a family with me? Will you share with me the responsibility of making this world a better place?" Victor opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring with a stone that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Yes," whispered Claire, then repeated louder, "Yes, yes, I want to." Victor stood and kissed her as if it were the first time, as if it were the last time, as if each kiss sealed a promise of eternal love. Around them, Mrs. Connie clapped emotionally. Elijah smiled from ear to ear, and the children from the daycare shouted with joy, even without understanding exactly what was happening. "There's one condition," said Claire when they finally separated. "Anything. I want us to get married here on the farm, on the porch where we almost lost everything, where we chose to fight for us." Claire looked around, seeing no longer the scene of past tragedies, but the place where they had built something beautiful, together. "I want our love story to be greater than any story of pain that this place has ever sheltered." "Perfect," said Victor, spinning her in the air. "We'll transform this farm into the happiest place in the world." 3 months later, that's exactly what Westridge Farm had become. Claire and Victor's wedding was a celebration that lasted 3 days, with guests coming from all over the country. Women who had been helped by the Institute, families who had recovered their lands through the historical reparation program created by Victor, children who now had a better future thanks to the work they developed together. On the night of the wedding, Claire and Victor climbed to the East Tower, no longer a place of secrets and death, but an observatory where they could contemplate everything they had built together. The lights of the Institute shone softly on the property, like earthly stars guiding lost people back home. "Do you feel her here?" asked Claire, leaning on the windowsill. "Rachel?" "Yes. Sometimes I have the impression she's watching, approving our choices." Victor embraced her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "I'm sure she is, and I'm sure she's proud of the amazing woman her daughter has become." "We did it," murmured Claire, touching her new wedding ring. "We managed to transform pain into love, tragedy into hope. And it's just the beginning," said Victor, kissing her neck. "We have a lifetime ahead to continue honoring her memory." Claire closed her eyes and for a moment swore she could hear Rachel's voice in the wind that blew through the coffee plantations. "My brave daughter, you've done more than I ever dreamed. You chose love instead of revenge, construction instead of destruction. Now live, be happy, and know that I'll always be with you." When she opened her eyes, Claire saw that Victor was looking at her, with all the intensity of the love they shared. "I love you, Mrs. Westridge," he said, testing the new surname. "And I love you, Mr. Westridge," she replied, sealing the promise, with a kiss that tasted of eternity. Below, life continued on the farm that had become a symbol of redemption. Children played in gardens where once there was only sadness. Women found strength where once there was only fear. And two people who loved each other built a future where once there was only the past. The silver keychain on Claire's neck shone softly in the full moonlight. "Truth rests where time has stopped," the inscription said. But time hadn't stopped. It had transformed, taking with it the old pains and bringing in their place the promise of better days. Claire Santos Westridge had found much more than the answers she was looking for when she arrived at that farm. She had found her home, her love, her purpose. She had discovered that some stories end not with revenge but with forgiveness, not with destruction but with reconstruction, not with tears of pain but with tears of joy. And in the tower where her mother had lost her life 20 years before, Claire and Victor planned the future of their children.